In the summer of 2023, a short video began circulating across social media claiming that a single letter and a single plus sign on your blood donor card could expose a hidden bloodline nobody in your family ever told you about. The claim was simple and irresistible. If your blood type is O positive, the video insisted, there's a real chance that somewhere back in your ancestry, quietly buried for generations, runs authentic Native American heritage. Within weeks, the clips had been watched millions of times. The comment sections filled with strangers swapping stories, people saying the claim finally explained a feeling they could never quite put into words. A grandmother's stories, a shape of the face, a sense of connection to something older than themselves. And underneath all of that noise sits a real decades-old scientific question that actual researchers have quietly been answering since long before social media existed. Is there truly something about O-positive blood that ties it to the first peoples of the Americas? The honest answer turns out to be stranger, older, and far more remarkable than the viral version. And to understand it properly, you have to go back roughly 15,000 years to an Ice Age landscape that no longer exists anywhere on Earth. To understand why this claim caught fire in the first place, you have to understand why it feels true to so many people. Blood carries an old kind of symbolic weight. It feels ancient, feels like it should carry memory. And when a video tells you that the substance moving through your own veins is a coded message from ancestors you never met, some part of the brain wants desperately to believe it. This is not a new impulse either. There is an entire genre of blood folklore online. It claims that Rh negative blood proves descent from ancient royalty or something otherworldly. Claims that certain blood types mark a person as chosen, gifted, or secretly special. It is the same wish dressed up in different clothing every time. The hope that identity is hidden somewhere inside the body, waiting quietly to be discovered, ready to make an ordinary life feel connected to something larger. And the O-positive claim landed on a particularly tender nerve, because for generations, countless families across the Americas have passed down a whispered story of a native ancestor, a great-great-grandmother said to be Cherokee or Choctaw, or simply described as native with no paperwork left to confirm it. When people finally take a real ancestry test hoping to prove that family story, it frequently shows nothing at all, and the paper trail runs cold. So when a video arrives claiming the proof was hiding in a blood type the whole time, it does not land as clickbait to those viewers. It lands as a door reopening. Among indigenous peoples of the Americas, type O blood is not merely common, it is in many populations close to universal. Nowhere else on the planet do blood types collapse this dramatically toward a single group across such a wide geographic range. Across Europe, across Africa, across most of Asia, you find a blend, A, B, and O, all appearing in meaningful proportions, the predictable result of tens of thousands of years of populations mixing, migrating, and intermarrying. They became the first peoples of the Americas, and here's the detail that changes everything about the blood story. The group that made this journey was small. This was not a mass migration of millions of people crossing at once. Genetic studies suggest the founding population that gave rise to nearly every indigenous nation across 2 continents was a comparatively small band, carrying only a thin slice of the enormous genetic variety that existed in the broader ancestral populations of Asia. Scientists call this a founder effect, and it helps to picture it concretely. Imagine an enormous jar filled with thousands of marbles in 4 different colors, red, blue, green, and white, representing the 4 major blood types. Reach in without looking and pull out a single small handful. That handful will almost never perfectly reflect the jar. Purely by chance, it might come out overwhelmingly white, with barely a trace of red or blue. If that handful then becomes the entire seed for a brand new jar, the new jar inherits that accident permanently, and it becomes overwhelmingly white forever after. That is essentially what happened with blood type. The small founding population happened to lean heavily toward type O, and every population descended from them inherited that same lopsided starting point. Layered on top of the founder effect is a second, equally powerful force called genetic drift. In small, isolated populations, traits are not simply passed down, they can be amplified or erased almost entirely through nothing more than the raw mathematics of chance repeating across generation after generation. A blood type that starts a population at 70% frequency can drift toward 90%, then push toward the full 100, especially when a group stays isolated for thousands of years. The A and B blood types were never defeated in some dramatic biological contest. In many indigenous American populations, they simply drifted quietly out of existence through pure statistical chance. And the effect compounded as people spread further south. Each time a group split away and pushed deeper into a new region, into the Amazon basin, into the high Andes, it represented a fresh, small handful drawn from an already narrowed population, a founder effect stacked on top of a previous founder effect, stacked on top of another one before that. This is exactly why the most extreme frequencies, populations sitting close to 100% type O, tend to appear most often in South and Central America, at the far end of that incredible migration. Population geneticists studying this broader pattern, sometimes called serial founder effects, have found that genetic diversity across human populations decreases steadily the further a population's ancestors traveled from the migration's origins, and the peopling of the Americas represents one of the longest single journeys in that entire chain, stretching from the Bering Land Bridge all the way to the southern tip of South America, thousands of miles and thousands of years away. It is worth pausing to separate two things that the myth conveniently blurs together. The ABO blood group system and the Rh factor are controlled by two entirely separate genes, inherited completely independently of one another, which is exactly why a person can be a positive or B negative or O positive in any combination at all. So when researchers describe Indigenous American populations as overwhelmingly type O and overwhelmingly Rh positive, they are actually describing two separate genetic patterns that happen to line up together, both shaped by the same small, isolated founding population, but through two unrelated mechanisms. It is also worth being honest about something the myth never mentions. Not every indigenous population fits this tidy picture. Some nations in North America, particularly on the Great Plains, carry notably higher frequencies of type A blood rather than type O, a pattern that genuinely puzzled early researchers when they first documented it. It stands as a useful reminder that real human populations are messy, full of local exceptions, and that anyone offering a single clean universal rule about blood and ancestry is already oversimplifying the truth, no matter how confidently that rule gets stated on camera. By the time European ships began arriving on these shores, most indigenous peoples of the Americas carried one of the most distinctive blood signatures found anywhere on the planet, overwhelmingly type O, and the story gets even more specific once you bring in the positive sign. Your blood type has two separate components: the letter, which refers to the ABO system, and the plus or minus symbol, which refers to the Rh factor, a protein either present or absent on the surface of red blood cells. Among Indigenous Americans, being Rh positive is close to universal, while Rh negative blood is genuinely rare, a pattern that also holds true across most of East Asia, which fits together neatly, since East Asia is precisely where the ancestors of the first Americans originated before crossing into Beringia. Rh negative blood, by contrast, clusters heavily in an entirely different part of the world, reaching its highest frequencies in Europe and peaking specifically among the Basque people, an ancient and genetically distinct population living along the mountainous border between Spain and France. So place the two halves of the pattern side by side, overwhelmingly type O, overwhelmingly Rh positive, and on paper it does look like a genuine signature. It looks, at first glance, like O positive really might be the marker of Indigenous American ancestry. This is precisely the moment the viral claim wants a viewer to stop thinking and simply feel that small flicker of recognition, the same instinct that fuels blood folklore in every one of its forms, whether it involves royal bloodlines, ancient contact, or a hidden heritage waiting quietly inside an arm. But there is one obvious question the videos never ask out loud, and asking it collapses the entire theory in a single sentence. The question is simple: how common is O positive blood everywhere else in the world? And the answer detonates the myth instantly. O positive is not rare. It is not exotic. It is not a hidden signature of anything at all. It is, in fact, the single most common blood type on the entire planet. A trait carried by more than a third of humanity cannot possibly function as a secret marker for one specific ancestry. It is roughly equivalent to claiming that brown eyes prove descent from one particular village, when brown eyes are common across nearly every population on Earth. O-positive blood is common across Africa, common across Asia, common across Europe, and common across the Americas, for entirely different historical reasons in each place. Indigenous peoples of the Americas arrived at their extreme O frequency through the specific traceable history already described: the small founding population, the long Beringian standstill, the compounding genetic drift. But billions of other people across other continents arrived at that very same blood type through completely unrelated paths, across entirely different tens of thousands of years. The blood type itself is simply a destination that many separate human journeys happened to reach independently. This points to something deeper the myth gets fundamentally wrong about blood itself. Trying to read a person's ancestry from a single blood type is a little like trying to identify an entire novel from one letter on one page. The letter is completely real, and a person can hold it up and study it for as long as they like. But on its own, it reveals almost nothing about the story it came from. So what does actually reveal ancestry? And this is where the real science becomes far more impressive than any blood myth could hope to be. A genuine DNA ancestry test does not look at blood type at all. For Indigenous American ancestry specifically, geneticists look at deep signatures that have been passed down largely unchanged for thousands of years. On the maternal side, traced through mitochondrial DNA, the small piece of genetic material inherited only from a person's mother, researchers have identified a small number of founding lineages labeled with the letters A, B, C, D, and a rarer lineage labeled X. If a maternal line traces back to the first Americans, it very likely falls into one of those specific groups. On the paternal side, traced through the Y chromosome passed only from father to son, the dominant signature is a single dip lineage researchers label haplogroup Q, an ancestor that distant contributes only a small sliver of any living descendant's DNA. With every generation, the share of the genome inherited from any single distant ancestor is cut roughly in half, until a real ancestor from 7 or 8 generations back can genuinely fall below what a standard genetic test is able to detect at all. So the honest answer to the question at the center of this story is straightforward. No, O-positive blood does not indicate Native American ancestry, but the reason so many people ache to believe it might point towards something that is genuinely true and something that really was buried, just not the thing most viewers assume, because what was actually buried here was never the blood pattern itself. Blood spilled across every proposed boundary and refused to sort humanity into the neat boxes that the prejudices of that era demanded, and in a strange way, the very trait some tried to use to divide people ended up being some of the clearest evidence of how genuinely connected human populations actually are. That darker history did not stay confined to academic journals either. For generations, the history of indigenous peoples across the Americas was erased, rewritten, and diminished by colonial governments, and blood itself became an instrument of that erasure. Colonial and later federal authorities developed formal blood quantum systems, official frameworks that attempted to define Native identity through precise fractions calculated on government paperwork, as though an entire language, family, community, and lived history could be reduced to a percentage typed onto a form. It is something lived and shared across an entire lifetime, not something unlocked by scanning a lab result or checking a box on a form. A blood type cannot grant that belonging, and a DNA test cannot bestow it either, and that limitation is not a flaw in the science. It is a reminder that the deepest parts of who a person is, the parts carrying their real name and their real belonging, were never going to fit inside a single letter printed on a cold government form, or inside a single plus sign on a piece of laminated plastic. The myth compressed one of the most remarkable journeys in the entire human story down into a 30-second guess about a person's own forearm. The reality is a 15,000-year migration written permanently into the cells of an entire hemisphere, a story that was never hidden, never secret, and never in need of a viral video to make it true. It only needed someone willing to actually look at the evidence and tell it honestly.